The Cloud Watcher's Evening. A Snoozies Bedtime Story. Chapter 1, Harold's Comfortable Chair. Harold Pemberton had been watching clouds for 43 years, 2 months, and 16 days. Not that anyone was counting, except Harold himself, who kept a small notebook with careful tallies of each day spent in his favorite armchair by the large window in his living room. The chair was brown leather, worn smooth in all the right places, with a small cushion that his sister Margaret had embroidered with tiny white clouds many Christmases ago. Every evening at precisely 6:30, after his dinner of soup and toast cut into neat triangles, Harold would settle into his chair with a soft awe of contentment. He would adjust the cushion just so, pull the small side table a little closer, and reach for his brass telescope, not a large or fancy one, just the right size for comfortable cloud watching through the window. Harold's house was perfectly positioned for his hobby. It sat on a gentle hill that overlooked the town, with a view that stretched all the way to the horizon. The large window faced west, so he could watch the clouds change colors as the sun made its slow journey toward evening. His neighbors thought Harold was perhaps a bit odd, sitting there hour after hour, but Harold didn't mind. Watching clouds was the most peaceful thing he could imagine. Tonight was Tuesday, which meant Harold would be looking specifically for cumulus clouds, the puffy, cotton ball variety that looked like floating sheep. He had organized his cloud watching by days of the week: Mondays for cirrus, the wispy, high-altitude ones, Tuesdays for cumulus, Wednesdays for stratus, the flat, gray layers, and so on. It helped him feel organized, and Harold very much liked feeling organized. He opened his telescope with a soft click and held it up to his right eye, adjusting the focus with tiny, careful turns. The late afternoon light was just right, not too bright, not too dim. Perfect for Tuesday cumulus observation. Chapter 2, The First Cloud of the Evening. Through his telescope, Harold spotted his first cloud of the evening drifting slowly from the northeast. It was a lovely cumulus, round and full, with edges that looked soft enough to rest your head upon. Harold watched it move across his field of vision, noting how it maintained its shape even as it traveled. This was what he loved most about cloud watching, the way each cloud had its own personality, its own way of moving through the sky. He reached for his evening cloud journal, a thick book with lined pages where he recorded his observations. In careful handwriting, he wrote, Tuesday, 6:35 p.m. First cumulus spotted. Approximately 15 degrees above horizon, moving southwest at steady pace. Color, cream white with touches of pale yellow from evening sun. Shape, reminiscent of Mrs. Watson's prize-winning sheep at last year's county fair. Harold always wrote detailed descriptions. He believed that clouds deserved the same careful attention that others might give to rare birds or exotic butterflies. After all, no two clouds were exactly alike, and each one told a story about the wind patterns and moisture levels high above the earth. The first cloud was joined by a second, smaller one that seemed to be following along like a lamb behind its mother. Harold smiled at this thought and made another note, 6:38 p.m. Second cumulus appears, roughly half the size of the first. Following same trajectory. They seem to be traveling together, possibly formed from the same weather pattern. Harold lowered his telescope for a moment and simply watched with his naked eye. Sometimes the broader view was just as rewarding as the detailed one. The two clouds drifted peacefully across the pale evening sky, unhurried and serene. Harold felt his breathing slow to match their leisurely pace. Chapter 3, The Science of Comfortable Observation. Harold had learned much about clouds over his many years of watching. He knew that cumulus clouds formed when warm, moist air rose and cooled, causing water vapor to condense around tiny particles of dust or pollen. He understood barometric pressure and dew points and the difference between maritime and continental air masses. But knowing the science didn't diminish the simple pleasure of watching clouds drift by. If anything, it made the experience richer. He adjusted his position in the leather chair, pulling a soft wool throw across his legs. The evening air was beginning to cool, and Harold had learned that comfort was essential for proper cloud observation. He kept a small basket beside his chair filled with everything he might need, his backup reading glasses, a thermos of chamomile tea, a package of plain biscuits, and a small cushion for his lower back. The third cloud of the evening appeared, and Harold raised his telescope again. This one was different, larger and more complex, with several smaller puffs clustered around a central mass. Harold studied it carefully, noting how the light played differently across its various surfaces. The parts closest to the sun glowed bright white, while the shadowed areas showed soft grays and the faintest tint of lavender. Fascinating, Harold murmured to himself, making detailed notes about the cloud structure. He had a theory that complex cumulus formations like this one were particularly good at predicting tomorrow's weather. Not that Harold was a meteorologist, he simply enjoyed patterns and had noticed, over the years, that certain cloud formations tended to precede certain types of weather. Harold poured himself a small cup of tea from his thermos, the steam rising in a tiny cloud of its own. He sipped it slowly, savoring the gentle chamomile flavor, and watched as his three clouds continued their unhurried journey across the evening sky. Chapter 4, The Gentle Art of Doing Nothing. There was something profoundly restful about Harold's evening routine. In a world that always seemed to be rushing somewhere, Harold had discovered the gentle art of sitting still and watching something as simple as clouds moving across the sky. His friends often asked him how he could spend so much time doing nothing, but Harold knew he wasn't doing nothing at all. He was practicing the ancient skill of paying attention. The fourth cloud of the evening was smaller than the others, perfectly round, and so symmetrical it looked almost drawn rather than formed by natural processes. Harold watched it through his telescope, admiring its geometric precision. In his journal, he wrote, 6:45 p.m. Fourth cumulus, unusually symmetrical. Diameter approximately 2 degrees of arc. Moving at consistent speed with others. Remarkable example of natural order. Harold had read once that watching clouds could lower blood pressure and reduce anxiety. He didn't doubt it. There was something about the slow, predictable movement of clouds that seemed to slow everything else down too, his breathing, his heartbeat, even his thoughts. When he was cloud watching, Harold never worried about tomorrow's appointments or yesterday's small mistakes. There was only the present moment and the peaceful drift of water vapor across the sky. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the oak tree outside Harold's window, and he noticed how the sound seemed to match the slow movement of the clouds above. Everything in nature seemed to move at the same unhurried pace in the evening hours. Even the birds flying home to their roost moved without urgency, as if they too understood that evening was a time for gentle transitions. Harold reached for a plain biscuit and took a small bite, chewing slowly. The simple sweetness complemented his chamomile tea perfectly. He had learned, over the years, that the smallest pleasures were often the most satisfying ones. Chapter 5, Cloud Formations and Quiet Thoughts. As the sun moved lower in the sky, Harold's clouds began to change color. What had been cream and white earlier were now touched with the softest yellows and peachy pinks. Harold adjusted his telescope and made careful notes about the color changes, including sketches in the margins of his journal. He wasn't much of an artist, but his simple drawings captured the essential shapes and helped him remember each evening's clouds. The fifth cloud of the evening appeared, and Harold noticed something interesting. It seemed to be forming even as he watched, growing from a small wisp into a proper cumulus cloud. Harold had witnessed cloud formation before, but it never ceased to amaze him. One moment there was empty blue sky, and the next, thousands of gallons of water were suspended in the air in the form of a fluffy white cloud. Harold wrote in his journal, 6:52 p.m. Fifth cloud forming in real time. Started as small wisps, now developing into proper cumulus structure. Remarkable to witness the birth of a cloud. He watched for several more minutes as the new cloud continued to grow and solidify, finding its place among the others in their slow procession across the sky. Harold's eyelids were beginning to feel heavy, not from boredom, but from the deep relaxation that came with his evening routine. The repetitive nature of cloud watching, the gentle rhythm of making notes, the warmth of his tea, and the comfortable support of his old leather chair all combined to create a profound sense of peace. He yawned softly and decided to focus on just one cloud for the next few minutes. He chose the largest one, the complex formation he'd spotted earlier. Through his telescope, he could see how its edges were constantly, subtly changing, wisps forming and dissolving, shadows shifting as the cloud slowly rotated in the high-altitude winds. Chapter 6, The Predictable Beauty of Evening. Harold had noticed, over his many years of cloud watching, that Tuesday evenings had a particular character. The cumulus clouds on Tuesdays seemed more leisurely than those on other days, more inclined to maintain their shapes and move in orderly processions. Harold had no scientific explanation for this observation, but he had learned to trust his accumulated experience. The sixth cloud appeared right on schedule. Harold had come to expect about one new cloud every 7 or 8 minutes during this time of evening. This one was particularly beautiful, with a shape that reminded Harold of a sleeping cat, complete with what looked like tiny ears and a curled tail. Harold smiled as he made his notes, including a small sketch of the cat-like cloud. Harold's tea was nearly gone, and he was beginning to think about the transition from cloud watching to his evening reading. But not yet, the light was still good, and his clouds were still putting on their gentle show. Harold believed in letting each activity come to its natural conclusion rather than rushing from one thing to the next. A seventh cloud drifted into view, smaller and more elongated than the others. Harold noted its appearance dutifully, but he was finding it harder to focus on the details. The warmth of his chair, the softness of the evening light, and the rhythmic nature of cloud movement were all conspiring to make Harold feel wonderfully drowsy. He set down his telescope for a moment and simply watched the clouds with his naked eyes. 7 clouds now drifted across his view, each one unique, each one moving at its own slightly different pace. The overall effect was like watching a very slow, very peaceful parade, one where no one was in any hurry and everyone had time to appreciate the scenery. Harold yawned again, longer this time, and realized that his evening cloud watching was drawing to its natural close. Chapter 7, The Gradual Fade of Light. As the sun continued its descent toward the horizon, Harold's clouds began to take on deeper colors. The whites became creams, the creams became pale golds, and the shadows shifted from gray to the softest purple. Harold made notes about the color changes, but his handwriting was becoming a bit looser, a bit more relaxed. He was entering that peaceful state between wakefulness and sleep that he had come to associate with the end of his cloud watching sessions. The 8th cloud of the evening was barely visible, more of a suggestion than a fully formed cumulus. Harold squinted through his telescope, trying to determine whether it qualified as a proper cloud or was simply a wisp of high-altitude moisture. After careful consideration, he decided it counted as a cloud and made a brief note, 7:03 p.m. 8th cumulus, very faint. Maybe dissipating as it travels. Harold's breathing had slowed to match the peaceful rhythm of the evening. His shoulders had relaxed completely, and his hands rested comfortably on the arms of his chair. This was one of Harold's favorite parts of cloud watching, the way it gradually slowed everything down until he felt as peaceful and unhurried as the clouds themselves. The 9th cloud was another beauty, perfectly round and so white it seemed to glow against the deepening sky. Harold watched it through his telescope for several minutes, admiring its pristine symmetry. In his journal, he wrote, "Perfect cumulus. Textbook example." His note was shorter than usual, but Harold was finding that words seemed less necessary as the evening progressed. Harold closed his eyes for just a moment, listening to the gentle sounds of evening settling over the town below. Somewhere a dog barked softly, and he could hear the distant hum of cars making their unhurried way home. When he opened his eyes, his 9 clouds had all drifted a little further across the sky, but they were still visible, still beautiful, still moving at their own peaceful pace. Chapter 8, The Comfortable Weight of Evening. Harold poured the last of his chamomile tea and took a slow sip. The warm liquid seemed to spread relaxation through his entire body. He had finished his biscuits earlier without really noticing, his attention focused on the gentle drama playing out in the sky above. Now he simply held the warm cup in his hands and watched his clouds continue their ancient journey. The 10th cloud appeared just as Harold was beginning to think his evening's observation might be complete. This one was different from the others, longer and thinner, stretched out as if it were being pulled gently by invisible hands. Harold made a note about its unusual shape, but his eyelids were growing heavy, and his telescope felt a bit heavier in his hands. Harold had learned not to fight this drowsiness when it came. It was a natural part of his evening routine, as predictable and welcome as the appearance of the first stars. His body was telling him that the day's activities were drawing to a close, and Harold had learned to listen to his body's quiet wisdom. He set his telescope carefully on the side table and leaned back in his comfortable chair. The throw across his legs felt perfectly warm, and the cushion behind his head was positioned just right. Through the large window, he could still see his clouds drifting peacefully across the sky, though they were beginning to fade as the light continued to dim. Harold's journal lay open in his lap, the evening's observations recorded in his careful handwriting. 10 clouds, each one unique, each one contributing to the peaceful rhythm of his Tuesday evening. Harold felt a deep satisfaction at having witnessed their passage, at having paid attention to something beautiful and ephemeral. His breathing slowed further, and Harold felt himself settling more deeply into his chair. The day's small concerns seemed very far away, dissolved like morning mist in the face of such persistent, gentle beauty. Chapter 9, The Space Between Waking and Sleeping. Harold's eyes drifted closed again, and this time he didn't hurry to open them. Behind his closed lids, he could still see his clouds, memory clouds now, drifting through the peaceful spaces of his mind. The first cloud, round and sheep-like. The complex formation with its intricate shadows. The perfectly symmetrical one that looked almost too precise to be real. When Harold opened his eyes, the light outside had grown softer still. His clouds were still there, but fainter now, like watercolor paintings beginning to fade. Harold realized he was entering that drowsy state he loved most, still awake enough to appreciate the beauty around him, but relaxed enough that thoughts moved as slowly and peacefully as the clouds themselves. The 11th cloud of the evening was barely visible, a whisper of white against the deepening sky. Harold watched it without raising his telescope, squinting slightly to keep it in focus. It seemed to pulse gently as it moved, appearing and disappearing as wisps of moisture gathered and dispersed around its edges. Harold's hands had relaxed completely in his lap, his journal resting against the soft wool throw. His teacup was empty but still warm in his hands. The familiar weight and texture of these objects, his telescope, his journal, his cup, all contributed to the sense of deep comfort that settled over him like a blanket. Somewhere in the house, Harold's old clock chimed 7:15. The sound was muffled and distant, reaching Harold as if through layers of cotton. Time seemed less important now, less urgent. There were no appointments to keep, no schedules to follow. There was only Harold, his comfortable chair, and the gentle progression of clouds across the evening sky. Harold yawned once more, a long, satisfied sound that seemed to release the last of the day's tensions. Chapter 10, The Natural Conclusion. The 12th and final cloud of Harold's Tuesday evening was the most beautiful yet, a masterpiece of natural sculpture, with layers and curves that caught the fading light in countless subtle ways. Harold watched it through half-closed eyes, too relaxed now to reach for his telescope, content to appreciate its beauty from a peaceful distance. His journal remained open in his lap, but Harold made no more notes. Words seemed inadequate now, too sharp and definite for the soft, dreamy mood that had settled over him. The cloud's beauty was beyond words anyway, it simply was, perfect and temporary and completely itself. Harold felt himself sinking deeper into his chair as if it were made of the same soft material as his clouds. His breathing matched the slow rhythm of the evening wind, and his thoughts moved with the same unhurried pace as the water vapor drifting high above. This was why Harold loved cloud watching, not just for the beauty of the clouds themselves, but for the way observing them transformed his own internal weather. The 12th cloud drifted slowly across his field of vision and began to disappear behind the oak tree outside his window. Harold watched until the last wisp vanished, feeling a gentle sadness at the end of the show, but also a deep satisfaction. 12 clouds on a Tuesday evening, a perfect number for a perfect session of watching. Harold's eyes closed again, and this time they stayed closed. His empty teacup rested safely in his hands, his journal lay peaceful in his lap, and his telescope waited patiently on the side table. Outside, the first stars were beginning to appear in the spaces between the last few clouds, and the evening air carried the scent of cooling earth and growing things. Harold smiled slightly in his drowsy contentment. Tomorrow would bring Wednesday's straightest clouds, and Thursday would mean cirrostratus, and so on through the comfortable, predictable cycle of his cloud-watching week. But for now, there was only the memory of Tuesday's perfect cumulus clouds and the deep, peaceful tiredness that came from an evening well spent. Chapter 11, The Gentle Weight of Sleep. Harold's breathing had become so slow and regular that it seemed to match the rhythm of the evening itself. His hands had relaxed completely around his empty teacup, and his head had settled back against his cushion at the perfect angle for comfortable dozing. The throw across his legs felt like a warm cloud itself, soft and weightless and perfectly positioned. Through his closed eyelids, Harold was still aware of the gentle sounds of evening settling over his neighborhood. A car passed slowly on the street below. Someone's dog barked once, softly, then settled. A screen door closed with a quiet click. These sounds didn't disturb Harold, instead, they became part of the peaceful symphony that was carrying him toward sleep. Harold's last conscious thought was about his 13th cloud. He thought he might have glimpsed it just as his eyes were closing, a final whisper of white against the darkening sky. Or perhaps it had been his imagination, his mind creating one more cloud to complete the evening's gentle story. It didn't matter. What mattered was the deep contentment that filled Harold as completely as moisture filled his beloved cumulus formations. The journal in his lap recorded 12 clouds, But Harold's dreams would hold 13, each one perfect and peaceful and exactly where it belonged in the vast, gentle sky of sleep. His comfortable chair held him safely as the last light faded from his window and the first deep darkness of night settled over the town. Harold's telescope caught a glint of starlight through the window, and his empty teacup seemed to glow faintly in the reflected light from outside. But Harold himself had drifted beyond noticing these small details. He had joined his clouds in their peaceful journey, floating through the soft gray spaces between waking and sleeping, carried by the gentle currents of the most restful dreams. Chapter 12, Where Clouds Go to Rest. In Harold's dreams, he was floating among his clouds, not as an observer but as a fellow traveler in the vast, peaceful sky. He moved with the same unhurried grace as his beloved cumulus formations, shaped by the same gentle winds, painted by the same soft light. There was no need for telescopes or journals here. Harold was part of the story he had been watching all these years. Dream Harold drifted past the sheep-like cloud he had spotted first, nodding to it like an old friend. He floated through the complex formation with its intricate shadows and layers, marveling at its architecture from the inside. He rested briefly on the perfectly round cloud, using it as a sort of celestial cushion, as comfortable as his leather chair but infinitely softer. In the dreaming sky, all of Harold's Tuesday clouds had gathered together, forming a peaceful flotilla moving slowly across the night. They carried with them not just water vapor, but the essence of calm evenings and satisfied observations, the spirit of time well spent and beauty carefully noted. Harold's dream self felt honored to be part of their procession. The clock in Harold's house chimed 8, then 9, but the sound reached him only faintly, filtered through layers of cloud and dream and deep contentment. Harold's body remained safely nestled in his chair, covered by his soft throw, held by the familiar comfort of his evening routine. But his spirit floated free among his clouds, finally able to experience their journey from the inside. As the night deepened around Harold's sleeping house, his clouds continued their eternal dance across the sky, some dispersing into wisps, others growing and changing shape, all of them part of the ancient cycle of water and air and light that had been playing out above the earth for countless millions of years. And Harold, both the observer and the observed, the cloud watcher and the cloud dreamer, rested peacefully in the knowledge that beauty continues even when we close our eyes to sleep. And now, it's time to rest. Good night.